Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. So, ever since this book, Inflamed, Deep Medicine, and the Anatomy of Injustice, arrived at my home, I've been really excited about this conversation. The book was written by Raj Patel and Rupa Marya, who I'll introduce in a moment. But I want you all to know that this book has opened my mind in a million different ways since I began reading it. And it's one of those books that I keep picking up and putting down and picking up and putting down because I have to look up something or it upset me so much in a good way for sure that I have to take breaks and go back to it because it's really enlightening. I am troubled and angry about what it reveals about the deeply embedded social injustice and racism and how we think about illness and how we treat it, as well as how we treat the planet. So much of what it uncovered, frankly, makes me ashamed of our country and colonialist structures around the globe. But I also find myself really hopeful and excited about what the authors reveal in its 350 pages. And I'm reminded by them that if we act now, we can really heal ourselves and the earth. So let me introduce the two authors. First is Raj Patel, someone I consider both a friend and really a teacher. I've learned so much from him over the years. He's a world-renowned expert in food systems. His work has spanned several decades now, subtopics and industries. He is currently a professor at the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, Austin. He has testified about hunger and food sovereignty to the US and the UK and EU governments and is a member of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. In addition to publications and journals about economics, philosophy, politics, international development, and public health, he also writes for a range of newspapers and co-hosts the Secret Ingredient podcast, which everyone should subscribe to right now. His books include Stuffed and Starved, and The Value of Nothing. He co-authored with Jason W. Moore, A History of the World and Seven Cheap Things, A Guide to Capitalism, Nature, and Future of the Planet. And he wrote Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice, as I said before, with Dr. Rupa Marya. Dr. Marya, it's so great to meet you. You are really leading the deep medicine movement of viewing poor health as intertwined with social, economic, political, and ecological stress. You're an advocate for victims of capitalism whose oppression manifests through illness and health-related trauma. And you're a physician, activist, artist, and writer who currently serves as the Doctor of Internal Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And again, I'm so pleased that you co-authored this book with my good friend Raj. So thank you both so much for being here today. And I kind of just want to dig right in. This is a really extraordinary book, and I want to congratulate you both. But I want to talk about this title, Inflamed. And Inflamed, it looks at inflammation, right, in humans. But you also speak to this metaphorical idea of inflammation that the entire world is facing today. And I'm wondering if you can both sort of, explain what that means. I think, everyone has sort of over the years has heard about how inflammation is so detrimental to our health, but it's really detrimental to everything that we're seeing happen in the world today. Raj, do you want to go first? Go ahead.
Sure.
Whichever.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. And the potted version is this. Look, we know that our planet is on fire. We know that the wildfires, the hurricanes. We just had the remnants of one pass over us here in Austin yesterday. The storms are vast and getting bigger, and we know that we're locked into a world that will get warmer. But there is a direct, not a metaphorical, but a direct link between the way that our planet is inflamed and the way that our body is inflamed. And those connections are not accidental. I think the big argument in the book is that actually they're deeply entwined, and so the systemic inflammation in our bodies and the chronic inflammation in our bodies is directly related to the lack of care with which colonial capitalism encourages us to participate in our lives on this planet.
Great, thank you so much. Do you want to go ahead, Rupa?
Yeah, well, when we think of inflammation in the body, we now know that inflammation is a healing response of the body. It's an ancient response of our immune system to to respond to damage or the threat of damage, and to heal the body when there has been damage. And what we see with chronic inflammatory diseases, which are most of the diseases I treat as a hospital medicine doctor at UCSF, from cardiovascular disease to cancer to Alzheimer's to inflammatory bowel disease, is that when the damage keeps going, when there's damages, the body is continually exposed to damage, the inflammation never stops. And then the inflammatory response moves from one of healing to one of harming the body. And we're seeing the same thing, it's not a metaphor when we're talking about the inflammation of the soil, for example. The current farming practices of industrial farming open up the soil to oxidation. When the soil food web is disrupted and ruptured this way, when it is damaged, the outcome of that is an increasing metabolism of organic carbon that gets released into CO2, which is it's literally a burning reaction. And so we're seeing it literally in the soil. We're seeing it in our societies, both in a large scale with these huge wildfires, but even on the microscopic level.
Sure. So, I mentioned that you're a leading expert in deep medicine, and I'm wondering if you can explain for our viewers and listeners what that means.
I don't know if I would call myself an expert, but thank you. So deep medicine for us is the understanding that health can no longer be viewed as something that we try to get as individuals. We have to understand that health must be attained in the context of our communities, of our families, where we are in our societies, and in relationship to the web of life. So if those things have been ruptured or disrupted, or if certain people are relegated second-class citizens, or not as important as other people, those things will affect the health system of the whole. And so that's really what we're looking at. And whether we're talking about second-class citizens being actual human beings, or being old-growth trees, or being the salmon, that if we don't understand the web of life that supports the health of our entire system, we're going to be ineffective at treating the diseases that we see. And instead of just giving people insulin to treat diabetes, deep medicine calls on us to dismantle those structures that are driving the rates of diabetes, so that we're not simply just treating the symptoms pharmaceutically, that we are enacting social change and structural change to have real outcomes change in health.
Sure. One of the things that infuriates me that I've seen, and I've seen personally too, is that when folks are faced with, whether it's diabetes or cancer, that they're often, especially if they're BIPOC or someone who lives in a very underserved community, that they're blamed for that. They're blamed for their own health. And, I even from friends, my first husband, who unfortunately died from cancer several years ago, he was often like, what did you do to get, people sort of, we're very inquisitive about, like, were you a smoker? Do you eat poorly? Do you eat a lot of sugar? You shouldn't eat sugar. All of these things that sort of put him in this, and he was uninsured at the time, put him in this position of sort of defending himself for being sick. And I just see that a lot happening. We saw it during COVID. Poor Black folks were sort of blamed. Well, if you'd been healthier, then you wouldn't have gotten COVID. How can we reverse that very, very detrimental way of thinking about health? Because you mentioned we need to move toward this idea of collective health, but when everyone's so sort of inward focused, that seems really difficult.
But that's why we're and Danielle, I didn't know about your first husband, and it's heartbreaking,
No.
and I'm sorry for your loss.
No, thank you.
I mean, but that moment of victim blaming is something that actually the current sort of colonial capitalist system has been doing for 600 years, right? I mean, we have a system in place that celebrates and focuses on individuals as low, sort of foci of profit and merit. And when you have that world where you have a system of diagnosing disease that only really looks at the body and treats the body, then there are some false solutions that present themselves. Like, for example, folk who are interested in complex food systems may have heard of the microbiome, and we're told, look, what we need to do, industrial agriculture has poisoned our microbiome. We need to rewild our microbiome. We need to get a greater diversity of things in our gut, because that's often associated with better health. And so there's an individualist approach to this, which is, I'm going to get a microbiome from an indigenous community where they still have a rich diversity of living beings in their gut, and I'm going to pop that as a pill. And you're seeing ideas like, well, let's rewild our microbiome, and the problem is that consistently returns to the idea of the individual as the site of health. The only way really to break that is to dissolve this sort of focus on the individual. And the only way to do that really is through organizing, right? This isn't to think about food and medicine not as things we consume individually, but rather that we produce socially. And the only way that we've seen that works is through this sort of transformation of self away from the sort of constrained individual consumer into a much broader understanding of being connected to lots of other beings as part of a system within systems.
Sure, it's really similar. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So the focus on lifestyle, and you'll see this with doctors, you just need to eat more or eat better and diet, exercise more. Well, for a huge percentage of the population of planet Earth, who happen to be mostly Black, brown, and poor, that's not an option.
Right.
And the exposures of damage that I was saying that the body is responding to with inflammation, these exposures are not a choice. These exposures have been created and recreated through systems of colonial architecture and capitalist architecture, so that the body is being wounded by something very intentional. And in that sense, it becomes very much like you're saying, victim blaming. It's gaslighting. It's the most cruel form of gaslighting, to say, somehow you're to blame for getting diabetes. You'll be lucky if you don't get diabetes in the next 50 years if the food system continues if our food and economic systems continue the way that they do. We'll all be lucky not to have diabetes.
Absolutely. And I mean, Raj, I want to go back to something you said about sort of this collective action, around like organizing. And it's very similar to how workers organize. We all need to think of ourselves as part of a union in a lot of ways, because we are part of a union. We are humans on this planet, and being able to act collectively to solve these things is very important. But my question is, how, I mean, it is very difficult to shift mindsets, and we still are in this mindset of victim blaming, and we're very embedded in a colonialist, capitalist structure that perpetuates these things. How do we break out of it?
Well, I do think that there's no individual therapeutic way to decolonize, to I for the rest of my life will be fighting the patriarchy that is within me and within the society in which we find ourselves. And that's, it's not the sort of thing that is particularly easy, but it is the sort of thing that is particularly necessary, and it's big. And you do it not on the therapist's couch, but as part of movements where you get called out and where you get lifted up, and where you get and we move together towards a better society. But the good news is that there are loads of movements like this. The joy of this moment is that while our elected representatives fumble, we have social movements the world over that are precisely tackling the issues of white supremacy, of patriarchy, and of injustice within the food and medicine system. Even tackling the idea that food and medicine are separate things. We're on food tank right now, but food and medicine are in so many civilizations coextensive. They're part of the same web, and you only get to do that not through an individual kind of purchase in the aisles of Whole Foods, but rather through joining that union, and a union becoming a place of education and transformation rather than just a place of collective bargaining.
Absolutely. That transformation is so necessary. I want to talk about the both of you for a minute. I mean, needless to say, this book is highly cross-disciplinary and talks about a million different things, but brings it all together beautifully. What was the experience of writing this book together, and what did you learn from one another as you were sort of digging in?
Oh, that's big. I learned how to write some coherent paragraphs. That's what I learned how to do. It was tremendous to work on this book together, because it was clear that neither of us could have written this book alone. And that this was a story that had to be told with plural voices, not just Raj's and my voice, but so many of the people who we've interviewed and whose work we uplifted, then all the managing editors and copy editors and developmental editors. There were so many people involved in the weaving together of this book. so I felt like it was a wonderful exercise in allowing my own mind as a physician to go big, and really see the big picture, which I've intuited and seen in the hospital when I'm taking care of, the grandchildren of farm workers who end up in the hospital with bizarre lymphomas or anaplastic thyroid cancers. I will be thinking of these things all the time, but to have a chance to sit and very carefully not only trace through what's happening today, but extend it back into history and see how did these ideas come forward? How was this architecture developed? What's happened to the soil of the San Joaquin Valley since the 1700s, since colonization? What's happened to the land where I am occupied in unceded Ohlone territory? What's happened here? And how has it left its trace in our cells, in our bodies, in our genome? And then how can we imagine moving forward in another way? So it was a beautiful experience. It was challenging, and it was definitely an opportunity to see what decolonizing my own thought looked like, to being with abandon, cross-disciplinary, like you're saying, just going for it, and that was beautiful.
Absolutely.
I mean, I couldn't agree, but it was such an honor to work with Rupa. I mean, it was not merely a chance to go to med school, but also, in a sense, to be able to dream big and to learn so much from Rupa's amazing work as an activist. Whether it's in indigenous communities, on pipelines as a water protector, or as a frontline physician tackling police racism and violence. I learned a great deal, and I guess I also, as someone who does political ecology and political economy, I knew, for example, that debt was a bad thing. And working with Rupa and learning about how it is that the threat of damage outside our bodies, that is the sort of constant hallmark of chronic inflammation, is one of the ways that for working class folk, particularly in the United States, when you've got payday loans that are have APRs of 400%, you've got this incredible outside fear and concern and worry of making sure that your family has enough to eat, that then gets rearticulated inside your body. And if we got rid of payday loans in the United States, we'd see a suicide rate drop by 1.9% and an accidental drug overdose rate drop by 8.9%. And this is a public health measure that, in a sense, I sort of intuited again, as Rupa was saying, but actually to be able to join the dots through this, from the sort of economic to the bodily to the systemic was a rare privilege, and I was honored to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I think that idea of connecting the dots is so important here, because all of these things are happening. And what you were able to do, both of you, is really put them together in a coherent way so that we could all sort of understand that the trauma of being poor affects everything. And it affects how not only how you live your life, but how others live their lives. And it becomes this vicious cycle for sure. I wonder, as this book gets out into the public and more people are talking about it and reading about it, what are the three things you want people to do with this book? I mean, is it becoming activists? Is it sort of realizing, what change that they can make both individually and collectively? What do you want people to do?
I want them to have a deeper understanding of their own health and the health of their communities in a way that can empower them to locate the source of disease. That it's not inside their bodies, that it's in the world around them. And if we want to see change, we all have to get activated. You can call yourself an activist, you can call yourself whatever, but we all have to participate in changing that world around the body. That this is not something that someone's going to do for you. This is not something your doctor is going to do for you, but that this is where health, the doorway for health is right there. And it's not just health of our bodies, it's health of the rivers, health of the forest, health of the entire ecosystem. So I want people to participate in the care revolution, to understand that we need to transform our world. We need to step away, walk away, slam the door on colonial capitalism. Say that was a bad chapter, 600-year chapter in human history. Let's do something different so that we all have the opportunity to be healthy. because what we've seen with COVID is we cannot vaccinate the global north and ignore the global south and expect that we're all going to get over this and be able to go back to our, music concerts and I'll be fine. We have to everyone's got to come into the circle. Everyone's got to come in. I would like people to understand that poverty and hunger are manufactured, and they've always been manufactured, and that the suffering we see of poor people and unhoused people is a decision that we collectively have made, and we can re-engineer. We can choose a different way and say, we're done with that. We're done with seeing our fellow humans suffer this way. I would like to see people involved in getting land back to Indigenous people throughout occupied, stolen lands, and to put an end to settler colonialism, because we know that their grandmothers who have been carrying the seeds and the knowledge for how to care for these lands for thousands of years are still there, and they're ready. So I'd like to see them in positions of authority of how we manage our lands and how we manage our foods, so that we can all be here together in a different way. So those are 3 things.
That's great. It's very powerful. And this idea of choosing a different way, Raj, go ahead and give me your thoughts.
Well, I mean, one of the things that that means that it's sometimes a book that is fairly dense to go through is that we have been unschooled in science, and part of the gift that we're hoping people will be able to receive through this book is some of the difficult science that has been withheld from folk, and that's actually part of the message, right? What we're saying is that colonial capitalism has for a long time decided who can think and who can feel, and that in general, this is the average Joe have been told that your opinions don't really matter. That don't you worry your pretty little head. Let the scientists or the experts take care of this. And in fact, what we're trying to do is empower folk to realize that science works best when it goes through peer review, and we're trying to not do away with science, but recognize that if we are to move towards a sustainable planet, we're going to need a lot more science, and we're going to need a lot more peers around the table reviewing. And you can be that peer only if you are empowered to join at that table. And that doesn't mean you need a degree. It means that the knowledge that you already have can and should count. And so what we're saying is, look, there are organizations near you already doing things like the Red, Black and Green New Deal, the People's Green New Deal, or the organization that Rupa helped to start up, the Deep Medicine Circle. These are organizations that are experiments in empowering and using science, story and movement building to be able to re-engineer and rebuild and reweave our connections between food, medicine, the soil, and the planet.
Absolutely. I love this idea of a lot more science and a lot more peers reviewing it. That makes so much sense. And it's really this idea of democratizing how we look at our health and the health of the planet. I mean, to sum it up, isn't it?
Definitely.
Great. I mean, Rupa, you talked about this idea of this evolution of caring before. And I know, Raj, you've talked for the last several years about this idea of a caring economy. And can you, I mean, those words sound great together. They do, but I don't think a lot of people can grasp them when they hear them.
That's because we've all been programmed not to understand, to recognize care. So the care of mothers, the entire human race comes out of our bodies, the care of the earth, the care of our children. All of these people who are doing this care, if we see right now, the care that the nurses are giving on the front line, all of these people have been devalued. All of these jobs have been devalued in a capitalist economy. And so how do we put forth and imagine a economy where those things are reversed, where the people who are doing the caring are uplifted, the domestic workers, the people who are growing the food, caring for the earth. They're currently in systems that don't allow them to care for the earth that they need to, that we actually need their care of the soil in order to grow healthy food and have healthy air and robust robust ability to withstand climate shocks such as drought here in the West Coast. I just drove through Kern County in California during a dust storm, and it was horrific to see how much soil was in the air. The AQI in Fresno was 400 and something. And the people who are being subjected to it are the people who are sitting there picking all the food. And so a care revolution is an opportunity to invert the system and to put those who are doing the care work front and center, not only in terms of their value, but also in terms of determining and setting what the agenda is.
Right.
Here in California during COVID, we had healthcare executive lobbyists whispering into the ear of the Secretary of Health and the governor, which meant that we never got weekly, asymptomatic testing. We were spreading COVID in the hospital. Nurses were in trash bags. Unnecessary surgeries were happening. People were more at risk, both patients and providers, because capitalists were in charge of our COVID response and not the workers, the carers. And so if there was ever a time to see the glaring problem of not having people who care at the center of decision-making, same thing goes with schools and teachers. They know what COVID safety looks like for children and themselves. They should be setting the agenda. That's not what's happening right now. And that absolutely needs to be the starting point.
Hear, hear. Thank you for describing all that. Raj, any comments on this idea of, making sure people understand what a caring economy really looks like?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just saw a study today about how, in thinking about meat, it's hard for humans to kill things that don't look like us. And the interesting part of that is us. Like, how is it that we come to constitute who we think we are? One of the big stories in the book is about cosmologies, about systems of stories that help humans realize that actually we are not just one being, but we are multiple beings with lots of species in and inside us and on us, and through which we come to be in relationship. And part of the way that colonial capitalism has succeeded is in persuading us that we are these little atomic things that can go around, and insofar as there are people who are not like us, we can use and abuse. And the idea of a care economy, an economy of care and repair, is that we should, first of all, repair our relationships with the soil. We should engage in reparations for the histories of damage that that this particular system has imposed, particularly on BIPOC communities in the United States and oppressed communities around the world. But then, the act of care is something that actually, we can be schooled into, and that a care economy is an economy that has stories about new beings for whom we ought to reciprocate care because they're already caring for us.
Right.
And recognizing that although they may not look like us, and although they may not have faces, these are beings that nonetheless are part of our world. And that rich economy of care not only is good for your health and it makes you happier and makes you a better person, but it also allows our planet to live in ways that our current system does not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think my final question, because I know you're both very busy, is you wrote this book during COVID when all of these things that you've highlighted in the book were people saw them maybe for the first time, right? They sort of understood like how our health and the health of the planet are connected, or how our food impacts our health, all of these things. But also the things that you uncover in this book have been going on for centuries. So it's kind of this weird sort of intersection of like the present and the past put together. And this must just have been a weird but wonderful time to write this book and put it all together. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the last 20 months. I mean, Rupa, you're on the front lines of fighting this disease that, this generation has never seen something like this before. And then Raj, I mean, you so deeply study all of these connections between our health and economics and the way we carry on as a capitalist society. How did this? It must have just been such a weird and wonderful way to write, because you couldn't be together in the same room. You couldn't, hash these things out, as many co-authors do.
Well, we talked every morning at 5 a.m. my time, and when I wasn't in the hospital, and I wouldn't call it necessarily wonderful. It was very traumatizing for me in studying, police violence and racism and the effect on public health. And then to see, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and it all go down as we were writing the book, as we were, really putting these things down, it was very painful for me to be, researching the history of slave medicine in the United States and how people's will and their bodies have been disrespected, people of color, Black people specifically, and then to go into the hospital and see who's in the ICU and who is in the wards. It was very painful to write this book. And I just hope, as people read it, that they understand this is truly our service to humanity, to the planet. It was not an easy thing to write, but there was a moment where we started to keep a running tab of all the things that were happening, because they were being echoed so much in the book. As people who are close to us were getting cancer, the wildfires, I was running away from them because I couldn't breathe. It was just a tremendous, the freezing in Texas.
Right.
It was just a tremendous, weird moment where the past, the present, and the future were all coalescing into one moment. So artistically, it was powerful, beautiful, intense. But it was a hard experience to write this book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I mean, the silver lining on this very dark cloud, and I think Rupa's exactly right. This was difficult, but what we're also seeing emerging from this is alternative ways of organizing things. The peasant movements that we've worked with, the indigenous communities that we've worked with, have figured out networks of care, of support for one another, of dreaming that better future. Right. And we almost, we caught a glimpse of it. We caught a glimpse of the fact that the government can spend money on, on folk, not enough and not for long enough, but the working class can be supported and celebrated. And the worry is that we're developing a rapid amnesia about that now. That all of a sudden, the working class, they're fine. We can return to just taking them for granted. And I think one of the sort of shining moments that we hope will shine ever brighter, and which we hope to fan with this book, is the power of movements to organize for a radically different world, one in which there is more of that care, more of that recognition of how it is that we can support one another with dignity.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what I liked most about this book is it shows what we can do and what the world can look like. And it while I was very angry while reading a lot of it and really fired up, I do come away with a lot of hope, and certainly a lot of tears. And I'm sorry I used the word wonderful. I just think it's amazing that you were able to do this together in such a chaotic time. But it reminds us that we can't have that rapid amnesia that Raj just spoke about, that we have this opportunity. This is our moment in time. And, hopefully, next year we'll be on the other side of this pandemic, but we can't be on the other side of making change. We can't go back to the way things were. There is no normal. Things have to be radically changed in order for all of us to have health and for the planet to be healthy. And that's why you two inspire me the most. And I'm just so delighted that this book exists. And I hope, everyone reads it or reads parts of it. There are parts of this that are really powerful. I just happened to open to page 228, which is in your chapter 6 about connective tissue. And it, you have this poem from Maya Angelou, and then you have, Eric Gardner's last words. And it's very powerful the way this book is put together. So again, congratulations to you both for putting together something that I think is world changing, and I'm really excited about it. Can you let folks where they can find more information about the book and also where they can buy it?
We're asking people to go to their local bookstore and support your local bookstore, or to go on bookshop.org. I think there's a link somewhere in there. If you want to learn more about the work I'm doing to reframe farming and rematriate land with native and non-native people in occupied Ohlone territory, you can go to thedeepmedicinecircle.org.
That's great. Thank you so much. Raj, do you want to give out any links to your work?
Well, I mean, I would encourage folk to go to thedeepmedicinecircle.org. I'm a treasurer for this organization, and I think it's the embodiment of everything that we're hoping to do through Inflamed. Please do visit.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for your time and for your work to help us all. I really appreciate it. And please stay safe and well.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.